Well, kia ora tātou. It's really nice to be with you. There's a beautiful spirit in the room. I felt it from the moment I arrived, so it's wonderful to be here. So I live in Wellington, in Wainuiomata. I lived in Auckland for 20 years after we came back from overseas. In fact, I met somebody at lunch and mentioned to her that she had her partner just joined a Restorative Justice group, and I said, which one? And she said, Waitakere Court, and I said, we founded that. We're part of the group that brought that group into existence back in 2001. So because I had a family up here, there's always a sense of belonging up here as well as in the centre of the universe, which is Wellington, a beautiful place to live. I was at a conference on Tuesday, Jenny Gill was there as well, where I spoke for half an hour trying to map out how we use this language of restorative justice, restorative practices, restorative processes, restorative circles. And there's a lot of sort of unclarity about that. And I tried to draw what I call a semantic map to give people a sense of just what a wonderful, powerful movement we are part of. It began in the criminal justice system, and I'm going to talk just very briefly about restorative justice in the criminal justice system, but it's grown beyond that to affect all sorts of areas of human life, education, the health sector, peacemaking, just so many different areas. And speaking personally, restorative justice has been one of the three great, I guess, strands that have composed my life, not just my academic life, but my life as a whole. One has been the area of Christian spirituality and theology. I'm a trained biblical scholar. The other has been peace work, peace building, peace studies. I've also studied in that and have a deep, deep commitment to the notion of peacemaking. And the third has been restorative justice, which I discovered about 30 years ago. And I read a book that literally changed my life. Things changed at all sorts of levels after that. I was appointed to a brand new chair in this field 6 years ago. It's the only one of its kind in the world. And it's an attempt to bring restorative practice into dialogue, particularly with public policy, but also with what's going on in the community, and kind of advance this movement of healing in society across the board. So although I'm no expert in trauma, I think what I do know a little bit about, I can intuitively see the connections. The brief I was given was to try and capture the essence of restorative justice. So what I want to do is give you a definition that I come up with, and I keep changing it. I'm always trying to tinker with it, try just capture the thing in the most helpful way. I want to explain this and then just offer some sort of feelers for how this stuff can relate to the issue of trauma and trauma healing at a collective and intergenerational level as well as a personal level. So restorative justice involves a voluntary relational process whereby those with a personal stake in an offence or injustice or harmful episode come together in a safe and respectful environment with the help of skilled facilitators to speak truthfully about what happened and its impact on their lives, to clarify accountability for the harms that have occurred, and to resolve together how best to promote repair and bring about positive changes for all involved. It's a long sentence, but it tries to capture what it is about this approach that is distinctive compared to all the other ways in which we address harm and justice issues. And the distinctiveness of restorative justice lies in a combination of a particular process, a process that focuses on a facilitated dialogue between those who are directly engaged in a harmful episode. Not just people speaking on their behalf, but those people who have actually been caught up in a harmful episode, to have a particular dialogue where those who have been directly involved in the damaging events come together in a way that everybody has equal voice and everybody is involved in decision-making, but that follows a kind of format that ensures that people's obligations are clarified and their needs are met. So at the heart of restorative justice lies a particular kind of dialogue that is often best managed by people who are there to help that dialogue to go ahead in a helpful way. But the characteristic of the dialogue is that it involves those directly affected where they have equal voice and decision-making power. Secondly, a restorative process is characterised by its undergirding relational values, particularly things like freedom of choice, respectful communication, truthfulness, accountability, empowerment, and equality of concern. So these are in the definition, those sorts of values. We could add others, but these are some of the ones that are really central to it. What for me makes this stuff so important, and when I try to sell this stuff, I always do it in this way, and Māori and Indigenous peoples understand this instantly. Other people understand it as soon as you point it out to them. It's just I don't think that way, but the moment you point it out to them and say, of course, that makes sense. Restorative justice is a fundamentally relational approach to addressing problems. It sees relationships as the key to understanding and changing human behaviour, because human beings are irreducibly social or relational creatures. We're relational all the way down. You can't go any further back than a relational reality. We are, after all, conceived out of a relationship. We would not survive at birth were it not for a relationship. As one philosopher has said, we depend on the kindness of strangers when we are born in order to survive. We are relational all the way down. Positive relationships are essential to survival and flourishing at every level of our being, physical, mental, social, and spiritual. Relationships make us human, but relationships also harm us. And when relationships harm us, relationships have also the potential to heal us. And so a restorative way of thinking starts with an episode of harm by asking the first question, what are the people, what are the relationships that are involved in this episode? This is important, of course, because the primary evidence of trauma are not really the most severe symptoms of PTSD, which we all, we all name quite easily. Perhaps the primary evidence of trauma is impaired quality of relationships, the inability to sustain positive and flourishing and nurturing relationships, which again makes this kind of way of thinking about justice so incredibly important. And the third thing that makes restorative justice distinctive is its envisioned goals or outcomes of the practice. The practice is intended to clarify what has happened in the past and its human impact in the present, and to facilitate collaborative decision-making between those who have been impacted by what has happened about how best to promote healing, how best to promote repair, how best to achieve positive changes for all involved. So a restorative process, whether it's in the criminal justice system or in schools or in workplaces or in hospitals or wherever we attempt to use a restorative process, it is an inclusive, democratic dialogue guided by a concern to address harm, to restore just and nurturing relationships, and to promote healing and repair for all. And this idea that you have a justice system that asks the question, how can we repair the damage? That is a new thought in the history of judicial philosophy. That's not the way our traditional system works. It does not ask that question. The conventional system works by asking these four questions. What rules have been broken? Who is to blame for breaking them? What penalty do they deserve? And how severe should that penalty be to deter repetition? And the court system, when you think about it, for all its expense and sophistication and the highly trained people that run it, it's essentially about those four questions. Has the law been broken? If so, who is to blame? Once you know that they are responsible for it, how much do we punish them? And how severe should that punishment be to make sure that nobody else follows in their footsteps? A restorative system asks different questions. It asks, who has been hurt and what are their needs? Who is responsible for addressing that hurt and those needs? Who has accountability for causing this harm? How can things be made right again? And how do we prevent it from happening again? Those are the kinds of questions that guide a restorative dialogue. And by restorative dialogue, I mean addressing a problem, any kind of situation of harm, any episode of harm, by having a conversation that may take all kinds of different twists and turns, but with the help of a facilitator who knows that at the end of the day we want these kinds of questions to have been addressed. If we follow this kind of format, the outcome can be quite astonishing. When you sit down with people who have been harmed by an episode, whether they're victims or perpetrators of the harm, and we first want to tell the truth of what actually happened, which is a past focus. We want to clarify the impact that it has had. What has it meant for you in your life? What has it meant for those around you? How far has the ripples of harm spiraled out to affect those in your whānau and community and so on? How can things be made right again? What can we do about this? How can we actually promote healing when terrible things happen? And how can we prevent it from happening again? So it's simple. I mean, this way of thinking, in one sense, it is simple. But the magic of it is that somehow those sorts of questions mirror the kind of journey that we need to go on when we are subject to harm. We need to go on this kind of journey. I guess what trauma is when that journey gets stuck at a particular point, and the negative questions about what happened and what the impact has been just freezes, and we live in that stage all the time. But we do need to go to the point of moving beyond that, to asking what can we do to heal? What is needed to actually heal the damage? And how can we make sure this is not passed on down through the generations? It's simple, it's incredibly powerful. So let me just give you a few quick connections with our theme today. So we all know that trauma, I guess, is primarily a neurological, psychological, and spiritual experience of individuals who are exposed to frightening or stressful circumstances. But we also know that it can be a collective or societal experience as well, where whole communities can be affected and controlled by traumatic fear, anger, shame, horror, distrust, and helplessness. And we also know that it is an intergenerational experience. This can be passed on. Richard Rohr, the spiritual writer, says, pain that is not healed is transferred. Pain that is not healed is transferred. That's intergenerational stuff. If I'm not able to deal with it, I will pass it on, because we are relational beings, because we're connected with others. We can't not be connected with others. So we know this. Most restorative justice programs focus on addressing individual trauma affected by criminal offending or other kinds of severe harm. Trauma that is primarily, I guess, experienced by the victims, but we now know, one of the great, again, insights, I think, of restorative practice, we now also know that perpetrating harm also causes trauma. So, you know, in the United States, there are literally millions, as a sign of America's history of warfare, there are literally millions of veterans who have come back from Afghanistan and Iraq. Literally millions of them, and they estimate 30% of them are suffering from traumatic reactions. And when you read the stories of that, it's not always, or even typically, what happened to me, but what I was involved in doing to others. That, you know, things that I did have traumatized me. So there's perpetrator trauma as well as victim trauma. And again, the thing about this powerful restorative process is that it enables perpetrators and victims to share their stories of pain together and to give healing to each other. So, but it's primarily about dealing with individual episodes of harm. Somebody said, harmed people cause harm, traumatized people cause trauma, healed people help to heal other people. But the process of restorative practice is characteristic methodology of providing a safe space for storytelling, an acknowledgement of suffering that has occurred, a clarification of responsibility, because I think that's an important part of coming to terms with any kind of trauma. It's just being clear on what your responsibilities have been and how you have lived up to them or have not. Acknowledgement of the suffering, community support, empathetic listening, a concern to promote healing, that kind of methodology can also be applied, I think, at a societal level, at a communal level, as well as at an individual level. And the reason why it can be is because group dynamics, group sort of disorders, if you like, mirror personal individual disorders. So the signs of a traumatized community are kind of the same as the signs of a traumatized individual. The same problems are sort of writ large over the whole community. So this kind of, I think my gut instinct, there has been an example of a program, maybe we can talk about this later, where this kind of process has been used at a more communal level. My gut instinct is that this kind of process that we've developed in the restorative world for addressing individual harm and trauma with a view to healing would also work at a community level as well, because trauma involves the symptoms of trauma are a whole list of things of kind of acting in the damage, doing damage to yourself, but also acting out and doing it to others. And I think the same kinds of mechanisms used to deal with the inner stuff would also deal with the outer stuff. I'm sorry, that's very jumbled, but it's a start.